Just a little video because you asked.
G'day guys, just taking a quick break while I'm at the office just to respond to a couple of questions that I had received from several people about the resins that I used. In the previous video I talked about different sorts of silicons, brushable silicons, the flowable Ultra-Sil from Barnes, etc. And several people said, what is resin, which ones do you use and how do you use it? So I thought I'd quickly film something just to put up a little response because they asked. I use EasyCast from Barnes. Now you'll be able to find the same thing. It's a polyurethane resin. This one is a very fast cure polyurethane resin. Has a pot life of about 3 minutes. So basically that means when you mix the two parts together in equal quantities, so I weigh mine out, so 10 grams of this stuff and 10 grams of this stuff. As soon as you start mixing it together you have about 3 minutes. In fact it's probably a little less before, the resin starts to congeal and set up. It has a demold time of 20 minutes, which means that it takes 20 minutes to harden, and then it fully cures over 24 hours. It's hard at 20 minutes, which means you can pop the pieces out of the mold in about 20 minutes, but it won't fully set for several hours after that. So if you've got a large piece, like I showed that building the other day, I don't know where it's gone. No, I don't know. But take for example this pond. You have 3 minutes to mix the resin, pour it into this mold. In 20 minutes you'll be able to take this piece out of the mold and it will be flexible. I mean, it's still flexible now because it's a small piece, but you'll be able to bend it. It won't be fully set. So pot life of 3 minutes, demold of 20 minutes. It's equal parts, so like I said, 10 grams of this, 10 grams of that, mix them together. I also use in my resin some of this, so you won't be able to see it. It's a jet black dye. Basically you can see the colour on the label there, which I put into a little dropper bottle. So for every 20 grams of combined material, I put 1 drop of black ink. Now, and that will turn the pieces this grey sort of colour as opposed to the white. So just as a very quick demonstration on how I use this stuff, I'm going to cast up a couple of bases. Now when I cast stuff, I normally put into my mould first with an old paintbrush some baby powder, some talcum powder, and then I tap out the remainder of that. That helps break the surface tension between the resin and the silicon so that it flows. And in my example I'll show you both. Pouring one base without the baby powder and another base with the baby powder, and you'll be able to see the difference, and I can tell you right now it'll be significant. Okay, so I've got my basic materials for what I need. I have my mould, I have some baby powder in a little cup here, I have my black ink, my 2 parts of the resin, both A and B, and they're both labelled A and B. I generally find that part A of EasyCast anyway is slightly heavier than part B, so if I'm mixing up 100 grams of resin to fill something, then I'll generally mix, instead of 50-50, I'll generally mix a little bit more of EasyCast part A than I would part B. So as I said, 100 grams, I'd probably do maybe 55 grams of part A and 45 grams of part B, because I notice that as I'm working through it, I generally use more of the white liquid than I do the yellow liquid if I'm weighing 50-50, but that's much of a muchness. So I have my resin, I also have a paintbrush for mixing in my talcum powder, so I'll just quickly do that. I'm going to do these ones on the outside, these 2 and this 3rd one here. I'll leave the 2 in the middle because they'll be the 2 that will be my examples that don't have the talc in them. So those 3 have talc, those 2 don't. I have a mixing cup and a set of scales. Now I weigh mine, you can do it by measurement, but I weigh mine. So I'm just going to tar out my scales. I generally put the yellow in first. So for this mould I know I need 20 grams, so I'll put about 12 grams of this stuff in here. So I think before I said I put 1 drop per 20 grams, but it's actually 2, so I'll pop in 2 drops. I think 3 went in, but that's alright. Then I'll retar my scales because these set off automatically. Then I'll do my next one. So I had 12 grams of the other one, I'm going to put about 10 of this one. And then with a coffee stirrer, I'm just going to stir this up. Try and get the sides for 15 or so seconds until it's combined. Now I just carefully pour into these molds the resin. Now I don't fill the molds completely, I just stop short, and then later on I'll get down on my knees and check them out and just put enough in just to fill it to the top. I try not to scrape resin like I do with plaster. If you've seen my videos, which I'll link below, where I scrape the top of the mold, I try not to do that with the resin. Okay, so this one unfortunately went a little higher, so I'll just scrape that off. And then when this cures, I'll end up with a little thing around the edge here. I've got a little bit of excess silicone here, so I'll pour it into this larger one. Won't fill the mold completely, but this doesn't have any talc in it, so we might get a good example of what happens if you don't talc the mold. So you'll notice as the resin dries, it goes this grey sort of colour. Now normally without the black ink it would have been a white, but this will take about 20 minutes to set up. Okay, so these pieces have been setting for almost 20 minutes. They're fairly hard. So I'll take this piece out first. Just flex the mold slightly and the piece will pop out. So there's the big one. I'll take pictures of this in a minute and you'll see close up the detail. Now this one I'll just carefully remove out so we know which one's which. So this one had talc in it. This one had talc in it. I'm just pushing from the bottom of the mold with my finger there. So those three had talc and these two didn't. Now immediately I can see, if we put that to the side, see that air bubble right there? And those ones in there? Whereas if we have a look at one of these, that piece there is not an air bubble, that's part of the mold. You can see a couple of reverse air bubbles there. I'll talk about reverse air bubbles later on. That's where there was an air bubble in my mold itself. But these ones come out a lot cleaner. There's that little bit of flash on that base that I scraped earlier on, and that just peels off. Okay, so it's as simple as that. That process of casting stuff is fairly straightforward. Bases themselves are pretty quick and easy to do. It's just a matter of sculpting the base, fitting a mold box around it, or gluing it to something you're going to cast on, putting a mold box around it and pouring in your silicone. Perhaps I'll have a look at that in another video. Several people have asked me about that as well. So there's a little video about the silicone that I use. I use Easy Cast from Barnes for the majority of my stuff. I do use a few other things. Such as this one, it's also from Barnes. It's a clear casting resin. This is a polyester resin. Now this one, like the silicone, you have to mix with a hardener. Now it's not 50-50. I think it's like 2%. So if I'm trying to weigh out 10 grams of this to fill a base piece, and I need 2% of that, I'm trying to weigh out this minuscule amount of hardener. So this stuff's pretty difficult to work with when you're mixing such small quantities. It also smells really bad. You should really wear a proper respirator when you're working with this stuff. But I've probably got a couple of pieces hanging around the place that I've cast up with this. Bear with me for half a second. Okay, just out of curiosity, there's some bases in here. You can see the ones that are white don't have the black ink in it, and the black ink makes these ones go grey, so it just helps the detail and stuff stand out a bit more. Okay. Right on top of this great big stuff of cast resin pieces. These are clear pieces with different coloured dyes put into them. Here's a base with orange dye in it. There's chunks of slate. There's one with a light blue dye in it. It's clear, as you can see. So good for markers and all that sort of stuff. There's one with a painted edge which has been chipped and stuff. So different types of resins. That one, like I said, was a polyester resin. Predominantly though, most stuff that you'll find both commercially and at a hobby level will be cast with polyurethane resin. There are lots of different types. I use one that's called Easy Cast. It's a very fast set polyurethane resin, as I mentioned. So I hope that one's been useful, guys. Let me know what else you want to see, and I'll see if I can get around to doing something about it. Catch you next time. Bye.